Lewis Hamilton calls himself washed. Somebody needs to get Sergio out of that Red Bull, and Ferrari's promising pace has disappeared. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Lewis Hamilton has taken a very critical look at his own recent performances in the world of Formula One. He has openly admitted that he feels he is no longer as fast as he used to be. Recently, during a challenging qualifying session in Qatar, Hamilton experienced yet another setback, finishing in 7th place on the grid for the sprint race. This outcome was particularly disappointing for him because it meant that he was starting 5 spots behind his teammate George Russell. Russell had a strong performance, securing a position on the front row next to Lando Norris, who had earned the pole position. Russell managed to achieve this by posting a time that was 0.399 seconds faster than Hamilton's time. Throughout this entire season, Hamilton has encountered ongoing difficulties when it comes to mastering his car during qualifying sessions. In fact, he has only managed to achieve 6 wins compared to Russell's impressive tally of 22 victories across all competitive events. If we exclude sprint races, Hamilton's performance looks even less favorable, as he has only managed to win 5 times while Russell has won 17 times. Given these statistics and this trend, Hamilton, who holds the record for the most pole positions in Formula One history, has started to express doubts about his own abilities behind the wheel. He has suggested that he may not be performing at the same high level that he once did during his career. When asked whether the issues he has been facing in recent races were a result of his own actions or decisions, Hamilton replied with an air of uncertainty. He candidly stated that he does not feel fast anymore. He was clear in saying that his slower qualifying performance in Qatar, particularly in comparison to Russell, was due to his own shortcomings and not because of any problems with the car itself. Instead, he explained that, similar to previous qualifying sessions, he simply felt slow, and this feeling has been a persistent issue for him week after week. Hamilton did note that while the car felt relatively decent during the qualifying session, he did not encounter any mechanical problems that would have contributed to his lack of speed. He also mentioned that he didn't have much more to add about his performance because he felt it spoke for itself. In many races, Hamilton has demonstrated better pace during the actual race compared to his qualifying performance. However, he recognized that starting so far back on the grid makes it extremely challenging to compete for victories. He expressed that even though his long-run performance felt satisfactory, consistently having to start from such low positions makes it nearly impossible to contend for wins, which is ultimately what he wants to achieve. Despite these struggles, Hamilton remains determined to give his best in the upcoming race. When he was questioned about whether the reset for qualifying on the following night would give him a better chance to improve, his response was tinged with pessimism. He emphasized that he did not expect to see significant improvements. Nevertheless, he did find a silver lining, acknowledging that the car itself has been fast, and he believes that George Russell is very well positioned to aim for pole position in the next qualifying session, which offers a glimmer of hope for Hamilton and his team as they look ahead. Charles Leclerc has expressed that Ferrari's more subdued performance during the sprint qualifying session in Qatar felt like a moment of reality check for the team after they managed to secure the 4th and 5th positions on Saturday's Formula One grid. The driver from Monaco had shown an impressive pace during the free practice sessions, standing out with a significant edge over his competitors, particularly Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. He had finished nearly half a second faster than the McLaren drivers, which had raised expectations for a strong qualifying performance. However, when it came to the actual qualifying session, Leclerc found himself falling behind not only the McLarens, but also George Russell, which was somewhat disappointing for him. He was also outperformed by his teammate Carlos Sainz, who managed to clinch the 4th spot in just the last moments of the SQ3 session. Leclerc mentioned that the qualifying results were perhaps more in line with the reality of Ferrari's pace, expressing disappointment that they could not take full advantage of the promising results seen in the practice session. He commented that it was not the best outcome because giving it their all and still finishing in 4th and 5th places was not ideal, especially when considering how crucial this weekend was for them. Leclerc acknowledged that the remarkable showing in Free Practice 1 had raised their hopes for better results, but he ultimately felt that the sprint qualifying results now provided a more realistic view of their performance. He reflected on how, after Free Practice 1, they had some thoughts that they might achieve a better outcome, but they did not meet those expectations in the qualifiers. He noted that looking back at Free Practice 1, they could see the possibility of competing for a sprint win, but in terms of qualifying, the results showed a different picture. He stated that for the time being, they needed to take qualifying as a more accurate representation of their current speed, which meant that they were not in the strongest position. However, he did remain hopeful, suggesting that race day often brings unexpected changes and things could turn out differently. Carlos Sainz provided insight into why he managed only a single lap towards the end of the final qualifying session. He explained that he had been grappling with the balance of his car, particularly dealing with issues related to understeer, which limited his ability to take risks when navigating the curbs. Sainz pointed out that the earlier laps he attempted did not go as planned, partly due to the impact of Max Verstappen's preparatory laps ahead of him, which created a challenging dirty air situation at the Losail International Circuit. Sainz commented that they did not fully utilize their car's potential during the session. He mentioned that even though his lap was clean, it was plagued by significant understeer, which hampered his ability to turn effectively throughout the entire lap. He also emphasized that it was a challenging situation since this was his only real opportunity to put in a competitive lap. He felt he could not afford to take too many risks concerning track limits after having missed a previous lap, so he had to focus on simply logging a lap. Unfortunately, he found himself in a situation where in the first 2 sectors of his lap, he had Max Verstappen ahead of him preparing his tires. This created a dirty air effect that made it difficult for Sainz to navigate the track effectively. In addition, the car's balance was not optimal. He noted that the softer tires he was using led to increased understeer, causing him to struggle with the car's handling. Sainz also mentioned that he needed to cool his tires for a couple of laps following the earlier attempts, and when he finally went for another lap, the balance issues with the understeer remained. Nevertheless, he managed to produce a lap good enough to secure 4th place in what was a very challenging session. Pirelli has conducted an initial analysis of the tires that were used during the practice sessions at the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix in Formula 1, and their findings have shown that there is no evidence indicating that the problems which affected last year's race are likely to occur again this time around. During the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix, F1 was required to change some of its sporting regulations to ensure that a special 3-stop race was held at the Losail circuit. This decision came after damage was found in the tires when they were used for long runs earlier that weekend. There were significant concerns that this type of damage could potentially cause tire failures on this very high-speed track. Consequently, the race, which ultimately saw Max Verstappen from Red Bull take victory, took place with strict guidelines on the maximum stint lengths for tires, limiting them to only 18 laps to help minimize any safety risks that could arise. Typically, after each practice session, Pirelli conducts thorough testing on 3 to 4 randomly selected sets of tires as part of their safety analysis. This process includes cutting sections from both the sidewall and the main surface tread of the tires and inspecting the internal layers. They specifically look for microscopic separations that can occur between the topping compounds and the carcass cords in the sidewalls, which had been a concern in the previous year. After the single practice session in Qatar this time, Pirelli decided to increase their inspection and analysis to 8 sets of tires rather than the usual 3 or 4. So far, the Italian tire manufacturer is pleased with the results. They believe that the changes made to the top of the pyramid curbs that were installed last year, along with much cooler temperatures this time, have contributed to a reduction in the stress levels on the tires. Simone Barra, the chief engineer at Pirelli, stated that based on the issues encountered last year, they made a point to check the tires from the first practice session this year. He mentioned that up to this moment, they have not observed any of the issues that were present last year. Barra expressed optimism about the modifications that have been made, along with the collaboration from F1 and the FIA, suggesting that these efforts have had a positive impact, which is certainly encouraging for everyone involved. Pirelli has also simulated the new computer-aided design, CAD, geometry of the tires, particularly in relation to how they interact with the curbs, and the results of those simulations align well with the experiences observed on the track so far. However, since the stint lengths during the first practice session on a sprint weekend are limited due to the time constraints, the biggest test for the tires in Qatar will occur during the upcoming sprint race, which is scheduled to be run over 19 laps. Andrew Shovlin, who serves as the trackside engineering director for Mercedes, commented on Friday that he hopes the modifications made by Pirelli in collaboration with the circuit to change the curbs, along with their simulations, will prevent a situation similar to last year's, where teams had to adhere to prescribed stint lengths unexpectedly. Nonetheless, Shovlin also pointed out that the best data regarding the tires will come after the sprint race concludes. Pirelli has shared that they are currently encouraged by the lack of any early warning signs that indicate there may be problems with the tires, as they did experience at this point in the previous year. Berra added that they will be able to assess the real performance of the tires after the sprint race, as this event will provide a more accurate representation of how the tires handle longer runs, with more mileage, competitive driving, and intense racing conditions. He concluded that while they will have a clear and definitive answer after the sprint race, the initial signs are very positive, especially since last year they were already seeing indicators of potential tire issues at this time. Red Bull driver Sergio Perez has openly acknowledged that his struggle to compete on the racetrack with Charles Leclerc played a significant role in his disappointing exit during the most recent qualifying session at the Qatar Grand Prix. He expressed that the intense on-track competition contributed to his inability to secure a better position. Furthermore, Perez disclosed that he encountered an issue with the anti-roll bars on his Red Bull RB20 car. This technical problem ultimately led to him missing out on crucial track time, especially in the closing minutes of the qualifying session. Despite celebrating a new 2-year contract back in June, Perez is currently under immense pressure to maintain his position at Red Bull, following a particularly challenging season. Remarkably, he has not stood on the podium since the Chinese Grand Prix earlier in April, which has left him anxious about his future with the team. During the first practice session in Qatar, Perez was classified 18th, and he struggled to make an impression in the sprint qualifying, finishing in 16th place and falling 0.7 of a second behind his teammate Max Verstappen, who is a reigning champion. Television replays after the first segment of qualifying highlighted an intense moment where Perez was seen competing against Leclerc's Ferrari on the main straight. As both drivers prepared for their final laps, tensions increased as they vied for track position, particularly through the first few corners. Leclerc ultimately managed to qualify in 5th place, just a fraction slower than his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz. Post-session, Perez was heard expressing his confusion over the radio, questioning Leclerc's decision-making during their battle on the track. "I don't know what Leclerc was doing there." After reflecting on his performance, he estimated that the encounter with Leclerc cost him around 0.2 of a second, revealing that his delayed departure from the garage had left him scrambling for track position during the critical moments of the first qualifying session. He explained this situation by saying, "Unfortunately, we left the garage a little bit late. We had an issue with one of the anti-roll bars. And then to get my final lap, we were all opening gaps. And then Charles came. We were fighting into turn 1 and so on. Lost a couple of tenths there, enough to be knocked out, unfortunately." He further expressed his disappointment, noting, "It was a shame because I felt like we really progressed with the car from FP1 to qualifying. We had a lot more potential, and it's a shame that we just ended up here." When asked about his chances for the sprint race on Saturday, Perez remained cautiously optimistic but realistic about his situation, stating, "I think it's going to be very difficult. I think, from now, we will focus on the rest of the weekend. In such a short race, I don't think there will be a lot we can do, but we will try." According to reports from planetf1.com, there is a growing belief that Perez may be replaced by Red Bull at the conclusion of the Formula 1 2024 season. The 34-year-old driver is currently trailing his teammate Verstappen by a staggering 251 points, especially notable considering Verstappen recently secured his 4th consecutive World Championship title in Las Vegas just a week prior. Sergio Perez and Yuki Tsunoda have both been summoned to meet with the race stewards following the sprint qualifying session at the Qatar Grand Prix. This meeting comes after both drivers were reported for allegedly exceeding the maximum allowable time delta between 2 designated safety car lines during the sprint qualifying event. In addition to this charge, they have also been cited for a failure to adhere to the commands and instructions given by the officials overseeing the race. During the crowded and competitive qualifying session, both Perez, who drives for Red Bull Racing, and Tsunoda from the VCARB team, unfortunately did not make it past the first qualifying round, known as SQ1. The official regulations set a maximum lap time of 1 minute and 40 seconds for drivers to navigate the track at Lusail between the safety car lines. Despite 16 drivers being scrutinized for a total of 38 instances in which the maximum lap time was exceeded, only Perez and Tsunoda have received notices to appear before the stewards, with their hearings scheduled for the following Saturday. The FIA has provided an explanation for why the other 38 laps did not result in further sanctions. They stated that in each of those cases, the stewards concluded that the drivers had acted appropriately to prevent interfering with the progress of other drivers on the track. In situations where necessary, the drivers slowed down significantly to allow others to pass, ensuring those drivers had clear access to the track ahead. Because of these actions, the stewards determined that these drivers were not driving unnecessarily slowly, and it was clear that any time above the maximum was a result of their appropriate behavior on the track, leading to no further action being taken against them. Both Perez and Tsunoda are now waiting for their respective hearings with the stewards, pertaining to the claimed violations of this particular rule, as well as a potential breach of Article 12.2.1e of the FIA International Sporting Code. This article states that a driver is at fault for failing to follow the instructions given by the relevant race officials, which are aimed at ensuring the safe and orderly management of the event. The hearing for Perez is scheduled for 2 p.m. local time on Saturday, with Tsunoda's hearing set to take place just 10 minutes afterward. In terms of their positions for the sprint race, Perez is starting from 16th place, while Tsunoda narrowly missed qualifying higher, ending up in 17th place, just 0.04 of a second slower than Perez. After the qualifying session, Perez reflected on how his battle for track position with Charles Leclerc impacted his performance. He mentioned that a series of events led to another early exit, which was disappointing for him. He shared his thoughts after coming off the track, saying, "Unfortunately, we left the garage a little bit late. We had an issue with one of the anti-roll bars. For my final lap, we were all trying to create space between us, and then Charles arrived on the scene. We ended up battling into turn 1 and I lost a couple of tenths there, which ultimately was enough to knock me out." He expressed regret over the situation, adding that he felt they had made significant progress with the car's setup from the first practice session all the way to qualifying. "We had a lot more potential to showcase, and it's a shame that we ended up in this position," he concluded, indicating his disappointment at not being able to perform at his best after a potentially successful run. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.